and the latest is this January drop of all these new devices. So the M2 Pro and M2 Max chips in the MacBook Pros that they've just released, and the new Mac Minis. I'll start with the MacBooks first, which is probably a quicker conversation because essentially I feel like a prophet now because I had a look at the pricing on the equivalent model that I would have hung out for. And as expected, it was, I think it's $300 more than the equivalent previous model. So I don't feel cheated there, and that's at full price. I got it off the refurbished store, which took a big chunk of the price off anyway. So I think it was $1,000 more for the equivalent model now that I'm now using right now. So,
so what model is that, and what's the price now?
So I picked up the M1 Pro 14-inch MacBook Pro, say that 10 times fast, last year in November off the refurbished store for, I think it was $3,000 that I got it for. Now, full price at the time, the equivalent spec, which was the 16 gigabytes of memory, 1 terabyte of storage model, was 3,700 and something. So I got it for $3,000 off the refurbished store. So that's a big chunk of saving right there. The equivalent one, which is the M2 Pro version one now. Yes, it's got some more GPU cores and it's a bit faster and all of that, but that equivalent model, the 16 gigs of RAM, 1 terabyte storage model, is now $4,000 Australian. So I don't feel like I lost out. A lot of the reviewers are basically saying with these that obviously if you've got an M1 series laptop already, there's absolutely no point to upgrade to these. This is really for the people who've maybe sat out and are still maybe working on the Intel based models. This will be a massive jump for them. But to be honest, before I go into the Mac Minis, which I think are actually a lot more interesting in this announcement, I actually would strongly recommend anyone who's in the market for one of these just to go to the refurbished store straight up and get one of the M1 Pro or M1 Max models because they're still excellent. They're still going to get years of support. And the speed bumps you get with these new M2 versions, yeah, that's great, but I don't think you're going to notice, at least for like 99% of the tasks you end up doing on them.
I totally agree. Look, the most exciting thing about the M range, and bearing in mind I'm running a basic M1 MacBook Pro and I still rave about it. So I would rave about an M2, don't worry if I had one. But these are such a step up that, and it's exciting too that the M2 is a step up from the M1. But you're absolutely right. If you go and get a refurbished M1 Pro with what, the Max?
Yeah, well, the M1 Pro, to be honest, I think is more than enough for just about everything. The M1 Max only really comes into usefulness, I guess, if you're going to max out the GPU cores in your workflow somehow. So I guess that would have to be advanced 3D rendering and like some pretty full-on 4K and 8K video editing, or some really dense Photoshop work or something that you would be doing with it. Otherwise, I don't think there's any point to get a Max chip at all, actually.
Well, there you go. And so I think, the reality is that, Apple is producing a really exciting range of products now, certainly in the computing side.
Absolutely. I did really want to touch on the Mac Mini, which I actually find the far more interesting announcement out of this, largely because if you think about Mac Mini historically, it's really just been more of an afterthought, like the beginner's Mac, for lack of a better term. I don't think it was pretty much underpowered with the Intel chips that it had, and it was really good for the server farm, or the maybe you could like chuck it under a TV if you wanted some computing functionality as a home theater system or something like that. But with the M2 chips now, and the base model is really cheap. I have to check the Australian pricing. I haven't checked that, but I know US it's only $599. Now you think about the amount of power you're getting for $599 US, that's ridiculous, because you can pretty much do professional workflows with that box, which if you think about, like in the past, you get a Mac Pro that was like $50,000 to do the workflows. That's hilarious to me.
Sorry. It makes you laugh, doesn't it? It's amazing where the world is today.
And now they've put the M2 Pro chip in the top of the Mac Mini line, and I looked at that and thought, wow, that's a really compelling desktop computer. I think comes out at $2,000, I think. But for considering the power you're getting, that's a steal really for what you're getting, and it's got a plethora of ports, everything you would ever want. But where I want to go with this is, I was thinking about the iMac and the Mac Pro, and the iMac hasn't actually been updated for 2 years now. It's still got the M1 chip in it, and it's only in a 24-inch size, so there isn't a larger size than that. The Mac Pro hasn't been updated to Apple Silicon yet, but I'm actually wondering whether or not Apple's trying to change its strategy by stealth here, because there's an argument, I think, that does the Mac Pro actually have any benefit going forward, given that Apple Silicon is all about getting everything as a system on a chip. The Mac Pro, the advantage of the Mac Pro anyway, historically has been about modularity. So you could plug and play graphics cards, swap out the RAM. Storage you could probably do, but graphics and RAM are actually built into the SoC now. So what are you actually modularizing in the Mac Pro if they were to actually advance it? On the flip side, there's the iMac, which is only in this sort of like consumer model variant that they've got out now. Yet what they've done is they've released their own displays, and they've released these very powerful desktop computers in the Mac Mini and the Mac Studio. Could they be thinking that, and this is where I think they might be going, is that modularity in the future for them means actually you get the display and then you just swap the computer out. So the Mac Mini or the Mac Studio now becomes the more important part if you want to, upgrade your workflow or whatever. And the idea of an all-in-one Mac just isn't important anymore, which I actually find ironic, given, the iMac saved Apple and put Apple back on the map back in '97 or wherever, when it was like the icon of the Mac range for so many years. It looks like it's just going to a place where it's probably obsolete, given the way that the Apple Silicon transition's been going.
Look, I totally agree with you on one level, but I just wonder, the one thing about the iMac is, gee, it looks good on a desk. And there's, one cable in, power cable, and that's that. It's neat, tidy, very attractive machine. Looks good in a workplace, upmarket workplace. Looks great on your desk at home. I think that you're right. Ultimately, you'd buy yourself an 8K Apple screen monitor or whatever, and you just swap out, to the M5 Mac Mini when it comes around, and, just move that way. So I think you're right. That's where it's going. But in the meantime, it's a bit like the iPod that lasted for a long time. A lot longer than anyone thought, and maybe the iMac still has that place as, it's an accessory.
Absolutely. And
workplace accessory.
Exactly. And I guess just finally on the Mac Pro, I think that also, I'll be very interested to see if they do release a new Mac Pro, what it actually is, because I don't actually know what it's bringing to the table compared to what they've already released so far.
Yeah, well, that's right. So that'll have to be mind-blowing. Like desk melting and power draining.
Or maybe they just need to have it in there so they've got a Mac that they can charge for $60,000.
And Hollywood will always buy them.
Yeah.
Because, you can't work on anything less.